That's great. So, what am I going to talk about in the presentation? I will talk about what we mean by change, why it is important to manage change well, and also what tools are available to you and your clients to do this well. What I'm going to say is based on the expectations outlined in the Scottish Government's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement and associated protocols, which are available on the Scottish Land Commission website, and the Good Practice team's vast experience of working with communities and with landowners and project developers throughout Scotland in practice. And then, as Emma said, my own experience of managing land in Scotland before I joined the Commission in my current role in 2023. So, just need to be able to move. There you go. So first of all, what is change? What do we mean by change? So we are obviously interested in land use change. Some of this can be very big, like the examples listed here. It could be a project. It could be a new business plan for landholding or a new policy. It could be new staff that people meet when they talk to the estate or when they are out and about accessing it. Or it could, of course, be the transfer of ownership as well. Important to think at this time that the change that I am concerned about in the presentation is really usually planned and implemented by a landowner or a project developer, often working for the landowner, but it is experienced by a community. And the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement really expects that a landowner will consult with communities over decisions over land that impact them. What we're talking about, of course, is significant change. We're not talking about small change. And we're also not talking about consultation which is statutory, let's say, in the connection with forestry. So what is significant change? There's a document available from the Scottish Government, which is on engaging communities in decisions relating to land. And what's on the left in the slide is taken from that document. As you can see, there's no precise definition for that. And what can be no significant change in one location could easily be significant change in another. So there's no real clear, all-encompassing definition. The important thing is that the change that we are really concerned about is usually felt at the level of the local population. So this is not about a specific impact, say, on one single neighbor. It is felt at the population level, and it usually includes things that impact on opportunities for sustainable development, but also well-being in the community, human rights, and in general, sustaining a viable community. The guidance then goes on to give a number of examples, which are really interesting to have a look at, and they include things like housing, land for a village hall, car park, etc., lots of things like this, but also jobs. And also important to think about that if you live and work in the community, or if the estate staff or the owners live and work in a community, which is often the case, then you or they may already have a pretty good idea of what would be significant change in this community and what wouldn't. Important also to think that change doesn't always happen all at once, but it could be lots of small incremental steps that happen over a longer period. And it is about the cumulative impact, as you see on the rewilding example on the left. So what are the risks connected to change and connected to not managing it well? Well, first of all, land use change can seriously impact communities. There could be job losses. There could be people moving away. That could impact the local school role, etc. And it could become more difficult for the community to access land, say for food growing or for housing. The other thing that's really important and that happens a lot in our experience is that if change is not managed well, existing relationships between estates and communities can break down completely or at least be damaged. And this could affect the estate staff who are often people in the community, and it could affect their well-being because the community becomes a place that is no longer a very comfortable place to live, that where they encounter conflict, for instance. And it's really important to remember that if trust and relationships break down, it often requires a large amount of staff time and resources to re-establish it. It also, of course, requires a lot of time and a lot of energy from the community to establish it. The other thing to think of is landowners are not only landowners, they have other business interests often. And if something doesn't go well with regards to change managing on their land, this could have impact on other business interests which are not directly related to land. And lastly, this is also about opportunities. And if change is not managed well, really good opportunities could be lost. And I'm just going to go into that in the next slide. So, because if done well, change can actually create new jobs and create business opportunities, both for members of the community and for the landowners. It can free up land for housing, increase communication between landowners and communities, and strengthen the ties. It can lead to cooperation. It can reset and improve relationships. It can build trust. And of course, it can showcase good practice to others. What's important to remember when change happens and when you are in a situation where you're involved in managing change is that change looks very different depending on whether you are the landowner or the project developer or whether you are a community member. I have been a landowner or worked for a landowner. I have not been a landowner, sorry, but I've worked for a landowner, and I know it feels very, very exciting to work on a project that drives big change. When you're in that situation, you are really focused on what you will gain through the project. You think it is desirable and you know there's a rational plan behind it. And it feels quite powerful to drive change. But on the other hand, if you are a member of the community and you're not connected to the landowner or the project, you will feel uncertainty. You will probably focus on what will be lost. You will see change often as unwelcome. You will experience it emotionally rather than rationally, and you will experience change as something that makes you feel very powerless. And that's really difficult to understand because the community members will be in a very different place from somebody that is behind a project or manages the land. So what can you do? I think the first thing that everybody tells us who works with us from estates that have gone through this is they always say, I wish we had listened more. So the first thing is listen and keep listening. Acknowledge the fears and the emotions of people that they articulate and don't try to talk them away. Just accept them as they are. Take concerns seriously and do acknowledge that there could be potential impacts. Be transparent and offer accountability. And that again is reflected in the Land Rights and Responsibilities statement, which talks about exactly this transparency. Openly present your drivers, your aims and objectives, because if communities know what you want to achieve and why, it is easier for them to understand what you propose. Give community as much of a say as you can. There are often big objectives in what an estate wants to do or what a project needs to achieve that leave quite a lot of room for other ideas, for creativity coming from a community, for instance, but also be open about your constraints and make sure that you manage expectations well so that people are aware of the things that you have to do and things that you can't do. Also explore opportunities for community benefits with the community. And these don't always have to be related directly to the project. So say if you are doing a peatland restoration project in one part of the estate, the community benefit could be housing, land made accessible for housing in a very different part of the estate. They don't have to be related. Again, the expectation for land to provide a wide range of social, environmental, and economic and cultural benefits in Scotland is outlined in the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. And what can you do in the long term? Because it's not always change, as I mentioned, is not always a quick thing. It is something that happens over time and is incremental. So it's good to think of this as a long-term relationship, especially, for instance, if the change is a new landowner coming in or a transfer of ownership to somebody else in the family, for instance. So listening is important in the short term, but it is also important in the long term, and just keep listening. Be transparent about the ownership and the decision making so people understand who makes decisions and why. Communicate regularly and use the appropriate medias and a mix of medias to reach as many people as possible in the communities you communicate with. Make an engagement plan. And again, there is guidance on how to do this. All the links are about guidance on the Scottish Land Commission website and tools that you can use. Include the community in decisions on how the land is used and managed. And again, there's guidance on that. And there's an expectation, as I said before, in the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement that this happens. Share the benefits of land with communities and really be creative about what benefits can be shared. We quite often talk to landowners who provide benefits already and they're not really aware that this is a benefit to the community, or they have ideas for benefits which they're not really putting on the table because they're not sure about whether the community actually needs this. And most importantly, all this management of change is about building and nurturing long-term relationships. So it's not something that you can do in one meeting. One meeting can be part of it, but you need to work on this constantly. And there's a picture on the left, for instance, of a Highland Games, turning up at the Highland Games, being available to people to talk to you, being part of the community. Like I know lots of estates and there are and people that work on them is a really great way to nurture those long-term relationships. And that's it from me. Thanks very much. And I will pass on to Amanda and de-share my screen first. I think with regards to the question, it's probably better to wait until both presentations are done rather than asking now. But really, if you want to put something in the chat, just feel free to do that anytime.
Thanks, Uwe. So I'm just going to share my screen now and get my presentation up. I think. That's us good to go. So thanks very much to Uwe. So I've been asked to focus on the practicalities around change and achieving effective land use change. And what you will have heard from Uwe, a lot of this really focuses around relationship building, communication and engagement, and looking at how to achieve both sort of mutual and wider benefits from land, from whether that's sort of from estates as a whole or from individual projects. Obviously, we could spend probably all day talking about this. I've only got 15 minutes, so I'm really going to focus in around communication and engagement, and really think about some of the experience I've had around this. And although I don't like focusing in on sort of negative stuff, first of all, I am going to talk through some common pitfalls, and then I'll move on to share an example of good practice. So in terms of common pitfalls, I'm going to go through each of these in turn, but I do have some examples to help illustrate some of the points. So, so the first thing to think about, and that I've seen happen quite often, is where an agent or developer assumes that people that they're dealing with has a certain degree of knowledge, which may not be the case. Um, can be quite challenging because you will be dealing with lots of different stakeholders, and within a community, obviously, different community members will actually have different levels of knowledge. But the challenge is if you make that assumption too early that everybody understands exactly what you're talking about, then that can lead to all sorts of misinterpretations of what it is that you're trying to do. So where at all possible, check people's level of understanding and make sure that you're providing information at an appropriate level. Because there's nothing worse than speaking and talking about something in a way where it's going over people's heads, and then essentially they're made to feel on the back foot because they don't really understand what it is you're talking about. So therefore, that can be a real challenge. And that really links into this piece around inappropriate language and jargon. Land management is just like any other sector. We all have lots of TLAs, three-letter acronyms that we like to use. We all have lots of technical terms that we like to use, or that we just use as a shortcut. We know what they mean, and again, we assume that others know what we mean, and I've got some examples of that on the next slide. And then the third point, before I give you an illustration of these three things in action, is this whole piece around consulting too late, or perception that you're consulting very late on in the process and that decisions have already been made. When you go out to consult or engage, it's good practice to do that as early in the process as possible. And that's because then that makes people feel that they have, have a real opportunity to share and to influence the development of any project. And the more detailed plans that you go out with, the more likely it is that people will assume that decisions have already been made, and therefore their opportunity to engage and influence is actually minimal. So I'm going to use this example here. Now, I have to say that this example, it's not that there were any particular problems with this specific scheme. This is a woodland creation scheme, but it's just that this would have been a map that would have been used as part of actually relatively early consultation. And it just actually illustrates some of the points. So if you look at the map here, it looks like it's relatively well developed, and that the decisions have already been made around the different woodland types that will actually be applied across this scheme. And therefore, the ability to influence or engage actively with that would be problematic. In terms of jargon, if you, I don't know how well you can actually see the box on the right here, but there's references to different NVC woodland types. So it talks about native broadleaves. I think there's certainly W9, W11 in there. Now, I know many foresters who don't even know what W9 and W11 are. So how a member of the public is meant to know what a W9 woodland looks like. I think that's quite a big ask. If you also look, we talk about, there's mention here of riparian woodland. We talk about land use classification being predominantly 5.3. There's lots and lots of technical jargon and information and assumed knowledge in this example. So you can imagine if this arrives through the post, through your letterbox, it's the first time you've seen this, you're going to assume that lots of decisions have already been made and it's providing information in a not very accessible format. So if at all possible, I would try and avoid producing maps like this for general consumption. Another pitfall that I've seen happen quite often is agents tending to engage with known contacts or making assumptions that they know who the contacts are. I had direct experience of this in my own community not so long ago. An agent, I think, managed a number of woodlands in the glen that I live in, and they went out to consultation. They sent the information to the neighbouring community council. And it was only because I was standing in the post office and somebody from further down the glen made reference to a project and didn't know anything about it. And it was because they had been effectively communicating with the neighbouring community council rather than the community council covering the area that I live in. And it's very easy to make these kind of assumptions or just think that you know these things. So really important to do your homework and to make sure that you're actually engaging with everybody who has a potential interest in relation to that project. The next thing I've put down here is lack of honesty. And I fully appreciate that in the early stages of project development, there may well need to be a degree of confidentiality, and there can be some sensitivities around that. But with that comes risk, particularly if people find out by accident what is being proposed, and therefore the messaging essentially gets lost, and you will lose control of any messaging. And it also means that misinformation can spread fairly quickly. Have dealt with an agent who experienced a challenge in that they had been asked by a landowner to undertake some survey work for what would have been quite a large woodland creation scheme on an estate, and that was early days, but they did not want other staff on the estate to know, and they didn't want some of the tenants to know that they were thinking about possible land use change. Now, how an agent is meant to go out and do some survey work when you've got lots of people in and around an area, and it would be pretty obvious that there was somebody out essentially poking around, and therefore the rumour mill would get going. So that's a really challenging thing for any agent to have to deal with, and it then meant that the rollout of any proposal was already challenging because people felt aggrieved that they hadn't been informed early enough in the process. So just to take a degree of care there. Another issue that I've seen on quite a few occasions is sort of not allocating enough time and resources. And again, that's not necessarily always controlled by the agent themselves, although sometimes I've seen agents sort of over promise in terms of their ability to act quickly, and the reality is that whenever you're doing any form of engagement, this does take time. One example, I was dealing with an agent in a part of Scotland, and they were trying to sort of progress a number of sites for a client in relatively short time scale. And what that meant was that they took a one-size-fits-all approach to their engagement, and pretty much just opted for a sort of almost a tick box drop-in session. And it was like a standard format that they just rolled out. And there was some quite challenging feedback to some of the schemes. And of course, it meant that because they were sort of staff, time limited, that they didn't actually have adequate resources to respond effectively to that. And it meant that some of the issues blew up, to a much greater extent than they might have had they taken a more sort of sensitive and nuanced approach to the engagement in the first instance. The next thing that I wanted to just think about was tone, and this is both in terms of written communications here. This was something that I sort of received through my door relatively recently, and I just thought it provided a nice example. If you actually look at the top line, we're talking about jargon and assumed knowledge again. They're talking about final statutory pre-application public events, part of proposal of application notice. Well, I have no idea what any of that actually means. So there's all sorts of issues there, but the paragraph I've highlighted there, you can see there that they've indicated that they actually have no statutory obligation to carry out any public consultation. However, they've chosen to still undertake voluntary public consultation. Well, to be quite frank, all that makes me feel is that they didn't really, it doesn't necessarily send sort of positive signals and give you a warm and fuzzy feeling that you're actually being listened to. So you just have to be really careful when you're thinking about written communications in terms of the language that you use and how that is essentially coming across. It's not just about language that you might use in written communications. Think about that sort of verbal communications as well, particularly if you're being challenged on something in a face-to-face session. It can be very easy to become defensive quite quickly, especially if you're very close to a project. I think Uwe's already made the point about not countering what might be quite emotional reactions from some of the stakeholders that you're dealing with very sort of rational arguments. People are in no mood to hear rational arguments if they're feeling very passionately about something. So it is very much about listening. So do think about the language that you're using and the tone that you're using and how what you're saying might be viewed by the people that you're engaging with. And then the final point that I wanted to make here, I put here all talk, no delivery. And I think the key thing here is I've seen quite a few instances where people have made promises, essentially overpromised and underdelivered. And the other challenge that I've experienced here is sometimes people make promises or say that they're going to do something. However, there might be a time lag in delivery. And that might be for very good reasons. We know that some of these land use change projects take quite a bit of time. So, but that's not always going to be clear to the stakeholders that you're engaging with. They may not have experience of these types of projects and may not understand the processes that you have to go through. And therefore, what might be a perfectly acceptable time delay from your perspective might be seen as being sort of procrastination and a lack of delivery from the stakeholders' point of view. So really important to share the timescales that you're going to be working with and in relation to this. So I'm going to move on to an example of good practice. And the reason I'm sharing this is I'm actually an independent advisor to the investment committee for this forestry investment fund. And I know Neil Crookston's on the line, and Neil's been heavily involved with Glendower, so I'm sure he'll be able to share some of his experiences with this site as well, and keep me right if I go off course. So just a little bit of background about this example. So the site itself was acquired by the Forestry Investment Fund, which is operated by Power Equity on behalf of Aviva investors back in 2021. So it's almost 4 years now since the site was procured, and the objectives here is very much focused around carbon, but Aviva has a very strong ESG element, and they're very keen to deliver wider social and environmental benefits from the site. So the site itself is a really significant site. As you can see there, it's over 6,000 hectares. And the intention is to complete around 1,800 hectares of peatland restoration and around 3,000 hectares of woodland creation. Roughly 2/3 of the woodland creation will be mixed native, and then 1/3 will be productive conifer. And again, because it's Aberdeenshire, a big chunk of the conifer will be Scots pine, slightly drier conditions. In terms of the built infrastructure on the site, there's very limited built infrastructure on the site. There's a bothy plus 2 other sort of smaller buildings up the top of the hill, very much used for shelter. And in terms of where we've actually got with the site, I think there's been two phases of peatland restoration have been completed, and that includes a training site for a new contractor. And we're just waiting on the final outcome of the EIA for the woodland creation. So we're expecting that hopefully sometime in July and August. Now, one of the things that we did early doors was to sign up to and agree that or commit to aligning the management of the site with the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. We wanted to be seen as delivering good practice in relation to LRRS, and everything we have been doing has been done with that in mind. So in terms of the engagement process, there was very early engagement with different site users and interests to very much reaffirm existing agreements and to really look at how we could engage with them on an ongoing basis, and actually to expand that engagement in places. And I'll give some examples of that shortly. There was also a very early and ongoing engagement with the Community Council, so it wasn't just a one-off. There's been regular attendance at the Community Councils from the agents who are Scottish Woodlands in this context. And then there was a number of other steps taken to just make sure that everybody who could get access to the information in different ways. So there's 2 entrances to the site where updatable signage has been posted. So you can see there's examples of the proposals for the site, and as plans have been developed, then new versions of that material can be posted at the site. And there's also a website, a dedicated website in this instance, and I'll show us a screen grab of that on the next slide. As part of the consultation and engagement process, there's been a number of drop-in sessions and site visits as well with a range of different stakeholders. And then on top of that, there's been a commitment to training and sharing good practice. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that in a couple of slides' time. So just in terms of the drop-in sessions, so I think just when we were doing sort of the early sort of planning, there were sort of 2 drop-in sessions, one at in communities at either end of the main road that goes past the site. And there was in excess of 100 people attended the first series of drop-in sessions. And then really important, one of the really important parts of all of this is to provide feedback. So there was a year on, once the designs had actually started to firm up, there was actually a further drop-in session held to really demonstrate to people how the issues that had been raised and addressed had been incorporated into the design. And again, turnout there was probably slightly less, but I would still say was in the region of about 50 to 60 people attended that second drop-in session. And the website itself, there's lots of information on the website about how the plans have evolved and developed, and also about the feedback that's been received and about how that's been dealt with. So you can see there's a sort of an update button there, and I think that Scarlett's going to post the web address of the website in there, but it's worth going in and looking to see the range of material and how there's been regular updates incorporated into that website. And then indicated there's a commitment to think about wider benefits delivery. We know that there's some real sort of skill shortages in the sector. So there's been quite a lot of work with Nature Scott looking at sort of at skills for peatland restoration, and through the fund itself. We've just recently had our first set of new it's a new forestry entrance scheme, which was developed in partnership with Scottish Woodlands and the Scottish School of Forestry. We had our first 7 go through that, and there's an expectation that there will be ongoing commitments to that. So, really good to see that that sort of all being developed. For many of you, you'll be going, well, that's a massive site. There's sort of lots of, there's, significant resources there to fund this kind of activity. And I would absolutely agree with you. It probably is, it's unusual, but there's actually lots of things that you can actually take, lots of principles that you can actually take from that example and apply, no matter the size of project or estate or piece of land that you're working on. And I've listed them there. I'm not going to go through them all in great detail, but I think I'll pick on a couple of these. And it'll be the ones at the bottom. So the first bit is very much about being accessible. So you need to make sure that people actually know who you are and that you are, that they're able to contact you easily. And that links in with going to people. Don't always expect them to go to you. So I know I talked about the drop-in sessions, and that was very much people coming to us. But at the same time, it's equally important to go to where people are. People who quite often will come along to your events will be people who've got an interest, and that may be a positive interest or it may be a negative interest. But if you're actually wanting to get broader feedback from the wider community, you need to go to where the community is, and you need to think about how you're going to access them. And I'm happy to say a bit more about that in the questions. And then that final point about providing feedback. I think it was Morag Patterson and Anna Lawrence did a piece of work which looked at the experiences of communities experiencing sort of change, largely for woodland creation. But one of the key things that came out of that was they felt it was, the people that they spoke to felt it was really important to make sure that they got feedback so they knew what had been done with the information that they'd fed into the process. All too often, these sessions tend to get information from people, and then it goes into a black hole, and nobody knows what's actually happened to it. So it's really, really important to close that loop and to provide feedback. So I'm going to finish off now and just provide some final thoughts and actually leave you with some questions. So what I think has been really instructive, certainly, and it's the folks at Paranaviva actively sought out somebody in the form of myself with some experience around the land rights and responsibilities, LRS, to make sure that they were doing the right thing right from the get-go. So have you got that right level of expertise at the right level within your organisation? Question. Do you actually have informed clients? Do you have clients that actually understand the importance of land rights and responsibilities in relation to achieving a good quality project on the ground and achieving effective land use change? And then really it'd be good to hear from you in terms of thinking about how you can actually embed good practice in this area in your work, and what barriers that you're coming across, and how we can actually overcome those barriers, and are there additional resources or support that you might need in order to overcome them. So look forward to having further discussions. just a final pitch. If you do want a little bit more around stakeholder engagement, I've been working with Comfor around their stakeholder engagement training. There's another session in November. And again, I think Scarlett said she would post the link to that in the chat function. Thanks very much.